World Architecture Day, it's celebrated on Monday, the 5th of October, and it's traditionally celebrated to coincide with the United Nations World Habitat Day. Now, since 1994, South Africa has seen significant transformation in every aspect of society, including the built environment. But COVID-19 has further highlighted the importance of architectural professionals in building health-compliant working and living spaces with social distancing. Charles Nduku, president of the South African Council for the Architectural Profession, now joins us in the studio to chat about the strides that have been made so far. Charles, a very good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here on Weekend Dawn. We've just seen the impact of COVID-19 and perhaps how it has impacted the built environment at large in terms of redesigning, designing, building suitable and adequate designs going forward. As we celebrate World Architectural Day on Monday, what has the impact of COVID-19 highlighted within the sector at large?
Yes, good morning. Also good morning to the viewers. Thank you very much for this opportunity. The COVID-19 has really highlighted serious problems that our infrastructure is facing at the moment. It has created a lot of uncertainties in the future. The big firms are closing, known firms that have been in operation for quite some time are closing. Small firms are dying, are disappearing. There's really a lot that is happening, caused by the COVID-19. But, that has really created some opportunities to rethink how architecture needs to be redefined in the future going forward.
Speaking of
architecture, sorry?
Well, you were speaking about how it needs to be reformed at large, and I'm just looking at a post-pandemic urban environment going forward. I mean, what does that look like in terms of centralization, decentralization, the use of technology, the fourth industrial revolution, and also just planning at large? How are those all intersected and been, factored in going forward?
Yeah, it's a challenge that needs a lot of thinking, and architects are actually really thinking seriously about it to an extent of, considering all the inspiration from the nomadic architecture, the architecture of movement, the emergency architecture, architecture which was used during those days of wars, people that are creating structures that are not permanent. This is what we've seen during the COVID-19. And in the stadiums, we've converted stadiums to the hospitals, ICCs were converted to the hospitals, and that seems to be the normal as we go forward. We have to think about architecture in a temporary form than in a permanent form, and which talks about the issues of the open space, the public spaces that are actually now have to be looked at in terms of the design, in terms of the social distancing, using natural environment as buffer zones to enhance social distancing, and also the issues of the redesigning of the homes, where you have to filter entrances, you have to look at the spaces that are actually compliant to health standards, public spaces and individual spaces. Surfaces that we are now, or finishes that we use to surface the buildings, must be those finishes that are actually preventing the spread of disease. And it's one of those challenges that we are now looking at in terms of the transportation, and then in an urban scale, we would definitely have to rethink about the public transport, because the public transport encourages big numbers. And now we have to think about cities that are designed to encourage walking, cycling, and then bring more intensity to the street, which also touches the issues of the economy, informal economy, because if you have people on the street, there will be economy in a small scale that will grow.
Now, Charles, looking at what you've mentioned about literally as it sounds, the entire value chain at large when it comes to the architectural space. You touched on the issue of housing. You also touched on the issue of transformation at large. I want to know from you, in terms of the issues that we experience with regards to South Africa with the lack of adequate housing and, an increase in the number of informal settlements that have been built. What role can architects play in perhaps, the realization of more affordable housing in line with the sustainable development goals?
Yes. The COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that we need to approach, the problem with a temporal solution. Informal settlement, those structures are not, we call them informal structures. And we can actually play a role, having learned from the COVID-19, as I said, emergency architecture that is designed to deal with this problem of informal structure, informal settlement, which is a result of the migration from the rural areas. People are looking for opportunities. That is not going to stop. The urban population is going to increase. I think we need to actually look into deal with those problems in terms of temporal measures. In fact, we need to look at the issues of kinetic cities that are not permanent. We think of cities as permanent structures, and the informal settlements have taught us that you don't have to be permanent to be to create a city. There's a lot of debate, in academics around the issue of informal structures, informal architecture. It's called informal architecture, but it's not the right word to call it. But maybe we must just call it impermanent structures that need to be sort of looked at seriously instead of us having to chase or demolish those structures down, because people are moving towards the places of opportunity, and because of the apartheid legacy and the way our cities were designed, the decentralization of the opportunities. And people are placed outside the urban centers, and that is creating all sorts of problems, transport issues. People have to use transport, spend money on transportation. So we need to reconfigure the whole cities in our country at the moment to respond to these problems that we are having.
Now, Charles, speaking about institutions and policies that had been designed perhaps to benefit, some along the value chain, looking at some of the barriers and challenges within the sector to date regarding race, regarding gender and equal representation, what does transformation look like in that sense?
Yeah, at the moment, transformation, yes, it's one of the top agendas of the country, and in our sector as well. We are looking at it seriously. At SACAP, we have established a transformation committee just to deal with this issue of transformation. Transformation, we've been talking about transformation for quite some time now. I think we need to come up with programs and timelines to deal with it, to put money. Government actually needs to sort of assist, putting money aside to deal with this, because it won't happen on its own. So we, SACAP and other 6 councils, Built Environment Councils, together with the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, CBE, Council for Built Environment, are actually collaborating to deal with this issue. And we are taking it seriously. We are trying to phase 1 to establish the extent of the problem. And then once we have the extent of the problem, and that is done through research, and we are in collaboration with CSIR on this issue, to look at the demographics. How big is the problem, of transformation, and how are we going to respond to it? Because we need to have the data in place first before we make any move. Without the data, we won't be able to address the problem. At the moment, we are at the phase of gathering the data so that we can have informed decision and actually open it up to the whole profession to workshop it, to actually come up with proposals and suggestions as to how do we deal and take up with the issue of the transformation. It has to be, it's a nation agenda. It has to be dealt with at a national level.
I mean, what do those timelines then look like, Charles? I mean, you're speaking about gathering data. It is 25 years after democracy, and, not enough transformation, some argue, has been, not enough transformation has happened within that sector. Well, what do those timelines look like in terms of the data that you speak of?
Yeah, the data will actually reveal how big is the problem, and then we will only be established the timeline and response, which will be informed by the data. And the data will tell us that it will take so many years for this country to transform. And then, therefore, to fast track it, we need to use A, B, C, D, which there's no other way that I can think of other than having to finance it. You have to actually be deliberate and finance it so that it can accelerate. Otherwise, this legacy is going to stay on and is going to affect our future generation. And I think we must deal with it now in our generation. So our children. And
Charles, many are of the view that talk is cheap. People have been hearing this, and obviously the will to act on what you're saying is something that many want to see those in power perhaps walking their talk. But I want to just conclude this interview by looking at some of the milestones that have been achieved within the sector since the advent of democracy in 1994. What comes to mind as we celebrate World Architecture Day on Monday?
Yeah, what has been achieved, the education is open to everyone now. Everyone is allowed to study whatever, degree towards any career of his choice or her choice. The numbers are moving, but are moving very slow at the moment. Hence, I was saying that we need to accelerate it, but, that has to be done in collaboration with the government. There has been quite serious talks in terms of the curriculum as well, and how do we look at the curriculum which respond to our issues as Africans. At the moment, our education is influenced by the Western norms. So there is a lot that has been achieved, though it is not enough. It is not enough. A lot of work needs to be done, and I think we need to really put this at the center of our discussions as to how do we enhance what we have. Yes, it is not enough in the sense that during this time or decade, really the economy has not been doing very well, and that has affected the growth of architecture. That would have seen positive and more interesting architecture growing up. I mean, you can look at the Dubai. Look how Dubai has really.
All right, Charles and Nduku, we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you very much for joining us here on Weekend Dawn. I mean, as transformation has erupted within that sector since the advent of democracy in 1994, more milestones have been reached, but more challenges and barriers to entry continue to plague that sector. Again, Charles Nduku, the president of the South African Council for the Architectural Profession, chatting to us about World Architecture Day and what transformation looks like within that sector, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic at large.